In my experiments with the bifilar Tesla coil, I until now researched the resonance of the coil. Now I will dive into the radiant energy in combination with the bifilar coil. Radiant energy is something mysterious that Tesla found out, and not much information can be found. But I did find a book. It's called Secrets of Cold War Technology, and it's by Gerry Vassilatos. This book is very inspiring, mainly in the first chapter. It mentions Nikola Tesla's radiant energy, the effects and how it is produced, how Nikola found out about it. And there's so much good information that I wanted to share it with you all. And this is the first part of a series about radiant energy. I hope you enjoy watching it. Okay, let's see some information. I'm on page 27 of the book. The abrupt sparks, which he termed disruptive discharges, were found capable of exploding wires into vapor. They propelled very sharp shock waves, which struck him with great force across the whole front of his body. And this is about Tesla discovering the first effects. And it's not explained, because when you've got an inductive spike, that's at the end when you open the switch, when a magnetic field is present and a dielectric field is present on your power lines, and you open the switch, this field energy explodes into an inductive spike, and this energy is more or less explained that way. But Tesla noticed something else. When you close the switch and the current surges through your power lines, he noticed these sparklets, these bluish darts of energy, and they hurt him. He felt it in his body. The simple closing of a switch on a high voltage dynamo often brought a stinging shock. This hazardous condition only occurred with the sudden application of high voltage direct current. This crown of deadly static charge stood straight out of highly electrified conductors, often seeking ground paths which included workmen and switchboard operators. In long cables, this instantaneous charge effect produced a hedge of bluish needles, pointing straight away from the line into the surrounding space. The hazardous condition appeared briefly at the very instant of the switch closure. I refer back to Steinmetz, his lessons, which I made a video about, and he explained the inductive spikes when opening the switch, but Tesla found this when closing the switch. It's not explained by Steinmetz. Though the high voltage DC generators were rated at a few thousand volts, such mysterious surges represented hundreds of thousands, even millions of volts. That's strange. Where is it coming from? Why does this huge voltage appear? Tesla began wondering why it was possible for electrostatic fields to move more quickly than the actual charges themselves. I made a little experiment to show this voltage at the closing of a switch. I made this little schematic for you to understand what I'm doing. I'm switching 10 volts into this bifilar coil. The switch is the MOSFET, and it's being switched by a square wave. And the bifilar coil gets to see the 10 volts. I'm probing with my oscilloscope here, and I've got a ultra-fast diode here and here. This is one of the pulses that is being probed. You can see I've got a line here that the voltage is 15.8 volts, but I'm only supplying 10 volts. And here is the negative inductive spike. And this negative inductive spike is pretty well explained by Steinmetz, Charles Steinmetz. I did a video series about him, and in this video series I explained this inductive spike. But this spike at the closing of the switch is what Tesla noticed. In modern electronica, this is called overshoot, and the ringing what follows. But it's not explained in and why it's there, because this inductive spike is there because of the magnetic field that is being built up by the voltage supplied to the coil, and this magnetic field collapses when the switch is opened again, and so the energy is transformed into the dielectric field, and a negative voltage pulse, an inductive kickback, is explained. But here there is no buildup of magnetic energy. So why is there a rise in voltage at the start of the pulse, at the closure of the switch? So we apply the 10 volts to the bifilar coil, and the voltage doesn't rise to 10 volts as we supplied. No, it rises to 15.8 volts. And this is what Tesla noticed. Okay, let's proceed. Page 28 of the book. Tesla understood that the resistance of lines or components viewed from the dynamo end seemed to be an impossible barrier for the charge carriers to penetrate. So when the voltage was applied, the charges met this line, and the resistance of the line was too much for the sudden rise of voltage from 0 to, let's say, 10,000 volts. And it was too sudden, too instant. This barrier caused a bunching effect. Electrostatic charges were literally stopped and held for an instant by line resistance. A barrier which only existed during the brief millisecond interval in which the power switch was closed. So the switch is closed and there's sudden a rise from 0 to 10,000 volts, and this is within milliseconds, and this caused a barrier, a bunching effect. The sudden force application against this virtual barrier squeezed charge into a density impossible to obtain with ordinary capacitors. It was the brief application of power, the impact of charge against the resistance barrier, which brought this abnormal electro-densified condition. This is why the conductive wires in his present experiment often exploded. Then the book goes on page 29 about the current reversal. Normally you have sine wave oscillation, and the current goes positive to negative, and the voltage goes positive to negative. And these oscillations normally appear at the resonant frequency of the system. And Tesla needed to avoid this because he noticed that the effects only occurred when it was a unipolar discharge. So there couldn't be any oscillations. There could not be any polarity reversal. And this required a discharge from positive to 0 or from negative to 0 without shooting through to the other polarity, not from positive to 0 to negative, but a singles from positive to 0, and then it should be turned off. Here was an effect demanding a single unidirectional super pulse, with both the oscillation and alternations eliminated. New and strange effects began making their appearance. So again, it's a unipolar pulse. No oscillations are allowed, no polarity reversals. We want a single spike of energy and not a sinusoidal wave. Tesla called this the damped wave. Page 30. The effect permeated each substance as if the shield were not there at all. Here was an electrical effect which communicated directly through space without material connections. Radiant electricity. And I like that term, radiant electricity. It's completely different. And it states here that the radiant electricity was able to penetrate all matter. Even a Faraday cage, what normally stops all electromagnetic radiation, it would not stop the radiant electricity. The Faraday cage was invisible for the radiant energy. It just penetrated him. That was page 30. Going on, page 31. Tesla also enlarges upon the gaseous aspects associated with this phenomena. So it's more like a gaseous state, and this can be seen with spark gaps. Some spark gaps show a white flame and it behaves gaseous, while other spark gaps show bluish purple discharges like thunder strikes. The classical Tesla coil discharges lightning, and this gaseous white flame is completely different. It has totally different properties. Now I've got a clip from a video that I will link in the description that shows this different kind, and it shows both things. It shows and the purple bluish discharges, and it shows the white flame. And often this white flame is capable of producing much higher distances, much larger distances. Then on page 31 it goes on. Tesla is experimenting with this strange pressure that radiates from his discharges. And he's putting it into oil. He was able to produce streams of this kind in oil, which so powerfully projected from charged wire ends that they visibly depressed the oil into a hole some 2 inches in depth. So he now talks about a discharge inside oil, and the discharge is between 2 wire ends, and the discharge is creating a space in the oil of 2 inches. Very powerful. So it's a pressure effect. They imply the presence of a medium of gaseous structure. That is, one consisting of independent carriers capable of free motion. So now we're stepping away from the classical charge theory, and they're talking about a medium of gaseous structure. Page 32, and this chapter is called Radiant Electricity. Through successive experimental arrangements, Tesla discovered several facts concerning the production of his effect. First, the cause was found in the abruptness of charging. The effect was definitely related to impulse time. And impulse time is something else than impulse. A pulse, we know, a square wave, 50% duty cycle. Impulse time is when the duty cycle becomes less than 1%. Second, Tesla found that it was imperative that the charging process occurred in a single impulse. No reversal of current was permissible, else the effect would not manifest. So again, it's unipolar. There's no changing of polarity. And this is still talking about closure of the switch. Tesla made succinct remarks describing the role of capacity in the spark radiative circuit. He found that the effect was powerfully strengthened by placing a capacitor between the disruptor and the dynamo. The disruptor being the spark gap. So what this means is that it's it's enhanced by a capacitor. And what does a capacitor do? It stores dielectric energy in its dielectric field. And when you discharge a capacitor, this dielectric energy field is then released. This energy is transformed again. And normally it's transformed into current. It forms a magnetic field. But it appears that Tesla found out that if he was quick enough in the discharge, that the magnetic field was too slow to form. It couldn't manifest. And instead, the energy was formed into radiant energy. It puts the ether into motion. It gives a push, a pulse. I'm still on page 32. The effect could also be greatly intensified to new and more powerful levels by raising the voltage, quickening the switch make-break rate, and shortening the actual time of the switch closure. Now, I must agree that these effects do occur, but it does not imply that you need high voltage. And with the future experiments that I have in mind and that I will conduct, I will not be using high voltage. I know some of you might disagree, but hey, I'm free to do as I please. And I believe it's really about the disruptive discharge and pushing the ether into motion. And I don't think you need 10,000 volts for it. The effects are powerful, but I don't need powerful effects if I can have a small push, but let's say 100,000 times per second. Then that push becomes very strong. If it's unipolar. If it's not unipolar, if the polarity is reversed, then it's a push and a pull. Pushing away the ether and pulling it back. And that's what AC does. So there's this pushing and pulling effect, and it's circulating. But when you only give it a push, then it's like a hammer. To do this, Tesla found a very practical way. He used the magnetic field of two strong in attraction being magnets with a gap between them. So two magnets attracting each other with a space in between where the attraction was strong. And in this gap in between the two magnets, in the strong magnetic field, he discharged the capacitor through a spark gap. And the spark gap did something special. The classical electric charges were influenced by the magnetic field of these magnets. And there are videos out there on YouTube where you can see this. The spark changes its form and it's disrupted. That's a good name, disrupted. And what Tesla found out was that something else appeared that was not disrupted by the magnetic field. Something else that he called the radiant energy. Imperative toward obtaining the desired rare effect, the capacitor and its connected wire lines had to be so chosen as to receive and discharge the acquired electrostatic charge in unidirectional staccato fashion. The true Tesla circuit very much resembles a pulse jet. Here we've got it, a pulse jet, where no back pressure ever stops the unrushing flow. Electrostatic charge rises to a maximum and is discharged much more quickly. Very interesting this, and very reproducible. Because what it's saying is, you take a capacitor, you charge it up with DC current if you like. That's the most easy way. And then what you do is make a short circuit. it discharges very abruptly and violently. And you should shortcut it for a fraction of a moment. So there is no oscillation, because normally when you discharge a capacitor, you've got a LC resonant circuit and it starts oscillating. The energy is transferred back and forth between the magnetic field and the dielectric field. The dielectric field of the capacitor is discharged and it's charging the magnetic field of the inductor. And the inductor, which can be a wire, but normally is a coil, of course, builds up its magnetic energy, and then, because the capacitor is there, it's discharging the magnetic field again, and it's transformed back into the dielectric field of the capacitor, and this goes back and forth until the wire resistance dissipates all the energy into heat, and that's called resonance. But he avoided this, and that's very special, I think. It's completely different. Thank you for watching. This was the first part of this series about radiant energy. I hope this information will inspire many to experiment with this radiant energy of Nikola Tesla. See you next time.